everyone context and introduce you. Let's talk about, just tell us who you are, where you're from. You all are from organizations that have a portfolio of brands, so we can't talk forever about your brands, but I'm going to give you about 60 seconds each. Tell us what you do, what you're doing at your organizations, and just personally in your roles, what are you focused on right now? And Jack, I'll start with you.
So my name is Jack Gibbons, and I'm the CEO of FB Society, and we're a portfolio company. We have food halls, we have full-service restaurants, we also have fast casual restaurants, and we're not necessarily limited to just those. We kind of play in a lot of different arenas. So, and I'd say what I'm most focused on right now is just new growth. You know, growing the company, the existing brands we have, keeping them relevant, as well as kind of looking to the future of what is our company going to look like in 5 years.
Great, thank you, Jack. Kelly.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Kelly MacPherson. It's very bright.
Yeah.
I am the CTO and head up supply chain for Union Square Hospitality Group. I've been in the restaurant tech industry for a very long time. Union Square Hospitality Group, if you're not familiar with them, we also have a portfolio of restaurants ranging from fine casual all the way up through fine dining. We have events business, we have a consulting business, and so really the things that we're focused on is, first of all, just still recovery from the pandemic, and from a technology perspective, how can we continue to enable a better employee and guest experience throughout our portfolio of companies. And so keeping it simple, but keeping it focused.
Great, thank you, Kelly.
Hello, I'm Justin Nedelman with Fat Brands. I'm the Chief Development Officer. Fat Brands is a publicly traded restaurant group. We have 17 brands, about 2,300 restaurants. We'll open more than 100 restaurants this year, international and domestic, and it ranges from full-service, experience-driven Twin Peaks down to kind of 80s nostalgic brands like Hot Dog on a Stick that are in food courts. Prior to joining Fat, I was the co-founder and CEO of a company called Eureka, which is a high experience-driven, full-service, kind of whiskey-centric restaurant group. And prior to that, I was a real estate developer. So full circle, started as a developer building retail, became an operator in the recession of 2008 when no one would lease our space. And now I'm back to real estate, really supporting our franchisees, making good real estate decisions and thinking about all product types from drive-through to end cap to reverse build-to-suits and a lot of co-branding. So maybe we'll talk about that today in terms of getting creative with the real estate.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And we didn't have to play any Oscar music, so you did amazing. Now, look, just as a kickoff question, we originally had Andy Hooper, CEO of Heart House, taking part in this, but he isn't able to make it to RestaurantSpaces anymore. But when we were talking in preparing for this, he said, you know, if we could leave the paradigm of the old restaurant world behind and then start from scratch, what kind of restaurant brand would we build? So I'm going to go through each of you now. If you had a clean slate and you were building a brand with a long-term future in mind, you know, what are the most important things to focus on? And we'll start with you, Jack.
So that's kind of what we do. So our mission is to create experiences never imagined. So I think looking at the business in different ways and thinking about, you know, all the different parts of it, whether it be, you know, culture, the brand, the people, technology, the food, the physical space, the design, and kind of really reimagining, whether it's an existing brand or a new brand, what it can be, and kind of how to take it into the future as opposed to just turn it into tomorrow.
Right. Kelly?
Yeah, I think a lot on the same lines, right? I mean, I think we all are in this business, and you know, it's one of those things that gets in your blood, and you become very passionate about it, and it's hard to get out. And so maybe we would start with the question of, if you know, you were going to open a restaurant or reopen a restaurant, and everybody told you everything that you know today of how hard you're going to work, how, you know, low margins you're going to have. It's, you know, 24/7, 7 days a week, you know, and the effort that we get in, but we all love it and we all build it. And so I think it's really about finding what we love about it and that passion. And I think it's that human connection. And I think it's providing those experiences, not only for the employees, but also for the guests. And so how can you reimagine what that experience is and use both the physical space and the tech to really create those experiences for your guests and figure out what that really means. And then being able to create those moments and those memories and that emotional connection through your brands.
So speaking from like the Justin Nedelman perspective as a creator, before I doing the real estate here at FAT. For me, if I was going to actually start a restaurant, hyper focused on kind of category dominance and really, really simple in terms of the offering and highly distinctive. So, what is really going to define you both wherever you're opening, but across the country? I think, too much quantity of menu items or too big of a footprint. Maybe you justify going into a specific location or it works in one mall, but really, really focused, simplified execution. But again, category dominance, whatever that is, whether it's fried chicken or yogurt or whatever is the hot commodity, you better be the best that there is anywhere, or at least try to be.
Excellent. Thank you for that and kicking off with that. Now, I want to jump in, and also I want to say, if you guys have any questions at any point, just throw your hand up. We've got Michael Owens up the back there with the microphone. If at any point you're like, hang on a minute, do throw your hand up for a question there. Now, I want to turn to the very broad overview you guys just gave, and we're going to try and jump back to all of those things. I want to talk about the evolution of the physical restaurant. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of forced innovation to try and keep up with the different ways that the customers are now interacting with the brand and want to interact with the brand, and they just want convenience on steroids. So we've seen a lot of innovations from, pickup windows and curbside and that kind of thing, all those things that we went through the pandemic. Where are you guys at now in terms of your brands in meeting the customers' expectations around convenience right now? And I'll go across again here.
I think it depends on the type of business. Certainly the fast casual one is, everybody's very familiar with that, but I guess one that's a little bit more unique is the journey of the consumer at food halls. And we sort of envision food halls as this meeting space that has a little bit of everything. So you have full service restaurants, you have fast casual restaurants, you have entertainment. We see visual arts being involved in it. We see it as really like this connection to the community, and I think it's very disruptive to how you've got this glut of big empty spaces and how you use them and how you connect to a community, and then internally how you really program it and design it to be unique and differentiated. And we've found really good results from doing that.
Okay.
I think it also, adding to what Jack said, it depends on the the restaurant type. So in fine casual, you got to meet the guests where they want to be, and whether that's digital pickup or in restaurant, and make that overused buzzwords, but that frictionless, seamless experience, and really understanding what that means and driving value through convenience or choice. But very different in the fine dining world, right? And so convenience isn't really go hand in hand with fine dining. And so again, how do you create that intimate one-to-one experience with your guests coming in the door, and figuring out what that right play is, right? And so I think as we continue to evolve the discussion today, what fits in one doesn't necessarily fit in the other. And so from a technology perspective, it's how do you build in the portfolio brands, how do you build the kind of this constant foundational layer, but then looking at kind of the strategic capabilities that you have to build for each different restaurant type.
Yeah, and then Kelly, I know you've talked about the marriage of the art of hospitality and the science of data, and potentially how do we create that Uber-like experience in restaurants for the customer that wants it? Where does your imagination go when you think about that?
Yeah, I think when you look at it in the fine dining world, what we're really focused on is looking at the entire guest experience. So looking at it all the way from discovery, when you're deciding to make that decision, all the way through your exit, and each one of those kind of interactions along the way. And how do you build this capability of whether it's running, and for us, the premise is how do I own my customer? How do I own my own data? So when I book a reservation, it comes into my reservation platform. I'm figuring out what the best turn times are. I can understand who and when, and Justin likes to eat fast, and I know that he's always, generally when he's going to come into our restaurants, he's going to go to a show, but Jack likes to sit there for hours, and instead of having a normal turn time, I can start to optimize the books based on prior, using data and analytics and some of the technologies out there to really curate an experience specifically for them, all the way through that experience to payment. And when you talk about the end or the exit experience, when you look at it in a restaurant, probably the most frustrating part is kind of that last 10 minutes, right? And when somebody's presenting the check, when you want to go to pay, you're kind of waving for the check all the time. And how do you curate an experience that gives, again, people choice, that if I just want to get up and leave, I can leave without making it kind of weird that I'm, dining and dashing and not paying my, we've been trained and ingrained all the time, dining and dashing is bad, but how do we figure that out now and still have that last kind of touch connection? It could be all the way down to, again, at the end of that dining experience, waiting for your check, paying for your check, but also if you have a coat check, and now all of a sudden you're fumbling for a ticket for your coat check, and you're having to have another friction point. So as I'm leaving, if I can have within my app or have just the host know that my code is waiting for me so I don't have to fumble with that ticket. And so how do you create a better experience for end to end? And so for us, we have this promise of enlightened hospitality and this emotional connection with our guests. And so how can you use data and technology to augment to that, to really create those one-on-one unique experiences? And I think that's what the exciting part of what tech and data coming together with the art of hospitality can even drive a more powerful experience for your guests, and then ultimately drive repeat business and customer loyalty.
Yeah, and great, thank you. And I'd like to come back to that in terms of how you build that today, work with vendors to construct that's in a way that's unique and right for your brand. And I mean, just to stay on this idea of friction and frictionless. And I mean, Justin, you and I were talking last night, like talking about the check-in here at the hotel. It takes 20 minutes. Yesterday we had 30 people waiting. It's 20 to 25 minutes. And you said to me, like, why don't we just get a QR code for this or have a kiosk here? And wouldn't that just be easier? And I mean, to be honest, it's not that scintillating an experience with the guest and the person on the other side of the desk. It's not something that, well, but there's still part of me that's like, you can't do that. Hospitality is about people. So, I mean, where are the moments for you in the restaurant where we can remove some of this friction?
So interesting, you have frictionless experience. So you're touching on even checking in here. Great property, beautiful Santa Barbara hotel. But if I can start my car with my iPhone 4 years ago, I should probably be able to check into my hotel room without waiting in line. So I think, in the early parts of COVID, I think it accelerated all of this, right? And at Eureka, we kind of broke everything and went to pure QR codes, and we're orchestrating how we were going to do this with less people on the floor, but still provide great service. It's hard for me to specifically speak about the 17 brands at FAT right now as it relates to technology, but we are seeing this huge drive to, everyone wants a drive-through, everyone wants a cheap second-generation drive-through, which doesn't exist. Smaller footprints for sure, but one of the things I'm looking at from a real estate perspective is it's hard for our franchisees to find real estate that makes sense relative to sales. So co-branding, which is different than hyper-focused 8-item menu being the best fried chicken in the country. But if we have use this example, we haven't done this yet, a 2,500 square foot Fazoli's that's going to be a rent-sensitive tenant, could we also put a ice cream component in there so the kids get ice cream after school while the parents pick up food for dinner? And kind of how do you merge these brands that actually, it's not just two random brands, it's two brands that actually work together really well and allows you to absorb more square footage, maybe at a lower cost per foot. So we're starting to think creatively about co-branding a lot. We're starting to see some will open this year in Texas and California related to two brands that were never next to each other, maybe different day parts. So that's how I kind of think about the real estate from a frictionless. I think it has to be as frictionless as possible from the time you make a reservation to the time you leave. And I look at a lot of the fast casual, and I think we still have opportunities where there's 40-item menus, there's 8 modifiers. If you can't order it on your phone while driving in a safe way, there's probably too many options. And you shouldn't be doing that anyways, but most people do. So with one hand, can you do it? And if not, there's too many options for that brand as it relates to online. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to that when we come around to brand building, and focusing on what you need to do and streamlining that. But I mean, you touched on real estate there. I do want to stay there for a second because this co-branding is really interesting. Jack, I know because I mean, great real estate is really hard to find right now, as like all of you in this room know. And I know you've thinking about creative solutions to come up with this. You're building something at the moment, right, to sort of capitalize on good spaces.
Yeah, like traditionally we all go out, either real estate in-house or brokers, and you find a place and you negotiate it, but you don't control, like you have no influence over co-tenancy or anything like that, and you end up maybe with neighbors that fit your brand, maybe with neighbors you don't. Sometimes we're just happy to find a place, right? So one of the things we're doing is buying bigger tracts of land and actually creating our own co-tenancy. So we'll put in some of our own brands and then kind of invite friends or other brands that we think are a great fit to that development, and really try to think of placemaking. So a lot of times the developers, they're just trying to get better guarantees and sign leases. So, but we're thinking really more about how do you create an area that's really special? It ties into the community, or it ties into, you know, a unique experience where you know, the different brands just fit together and they create this really kind of place that's special. So that's one of the things that we're kind of playing with.
Possibly working with other retail brands as well outside of restaurants?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we think that just this idea of really creating a space that's unique and special, it attracts better quality retail, better quality restaurants, and, you know, ones that you kind of all of a sudden you feel more premium.
I know we're jumping around here a bit. I want to go back into the restaurant. We're talking about, you know, just convenience and weaving that into the design, but the dining room. Tomorrow we're going to have a presentation from WD Partners, just, you know, different configurations that they've come up with to sort of, you know, what does the dining room look like when we are trying to put these different elements into a space. So, you know, I'll open that up to you guys. You know, resizing the dining room. I guess again it comes down to what kind of concept we're talking about, but how do you see the optimal kind of dining room space moving forward?
It would depend on the brand, but if we're talking about like our polished casual brands, I think we're actually looking at kind of going against the trend and taking more space and then using that space uniquely. Maybe we use it for a speakeasy that we'll put inside the restaurant. Maybe we make it into a champagne bar. Maybe we try to create this like landing area when people come in, that it's kind of a unique wine experience. But we think that you know, where people are trying to size down a lot of things, which makes a lot of sense in fast casual, but in polished, where people are looking for experiences, we're thinking more like, how do we add in experiences that actually make the more people want to come for different reasons and create a more dynamic crowd.
Right. And Justin, I want to jump to you there, just from I guess a QSR perspective, a limited service perspective. You know, we were preparing for this, and I said, you know, send me some thoughts, and you wrote down one sort of stream of consciousness thing, and it was, you know, we've got to make dining rooms worth it, otherwise we're just going to be a ghost kitchen. And I liked that. It was kind of stuck out to me. So, you know, in QSR, Jack touched on it a bit then from a fast casual polished perspective, but do people even want dining in a QSR?
I think it's ranging. I mean, there's some of our brands that have moved to 70% to go that were before COVID 30%. So that's a big shift. So in those cases, we're looking at franchisees that had a 4,000 square foot XYZ brand, and now they want to do a 1,200 square foot Delco. But there's still demand for that dine-in. The question is, how do you make that efficient? So it's just all about efficiency. I mean, I remember going through the process of recapping Eureka in 2019, and we were talking to private equity all over the country. They're asking how we're hitting, you know, 19% margins in California at the store level, and everything was designed around really expensive labor. So every little inch of the restaurant, from the hostess stand to the distance of the bar, how can we staff this with the least amount of people with the highest level of service, the distance of the expo line from the furthest seat, et cetera. And, you know, wages are going up in California. I think fast food is like $20+. That means that everybody's going to be that and more. So assuming that wages grow like 3 times faster than inflation forever in restaurants, how do you design restaurants that are like hyper efficient in terms of like every step a human has to take, not to decrease labor, but to increase service and hold the line in terms of the humans on the floor. So from like the Eureka perspective, back at that point, it was hyper efficiency in terms of how it's laid out and no dead space. And where I sit at FAT today, it's smaller footprint restaurants, as I said, co-branding. And then to me, it's like, how do you create opportunities to create value between like 2:30 and 5 o'clock? So if you're making homemade pasta for some great Italian restaurant, why aren't you selling family packets of pre-ordered family dinners that the kitchen can make from 3 to 5? You just can't afford, at least on the West Coast, any dead time in a restaurant anymore because of the cost of wages and real estate. So that's where my brain goes.
Got you. And look, and to continue that line of efficiency and just where innovation might take us. I'm going to jump to another part of the restaurant. So forgive my jumping around, but to the drive-through. That's an area where obviously we saw a lot of throughput during COVID, and a lot of that doesn't look like it's going away. There's a lot of innovation happening there. And Kelly, I know apart from your role with Union Square Hospitality Group, you've also working in an advisory role with certain tech startups. One of those is focused on drive-through. What can we expect in the future there in terms of how that can improve that experience?
Yeah, and prior to Union Square Hospitality Group, I spent time at RBI. So I've worked on drive-throughs for a while, and I think when I started there in 2012, over the course of time, it was always about what is the drive-through of the future? How can we reimagine? How can we redesign the drive-through? And I think continuing to be a focus. And so when you look at it, it's really about, again, that experience of convenience and throughput and getting through that drive-through line, speed, time, order accuracy, all the fundamentals that we've been focused on in drive-through throughout the years. And so I think when you look at it is how can tech play into that? And so there's a couple components to that of continued feet. It's how do you digitize the drive-throughs? How do you have dynamic content? So when you're driving up to the menu board, if somebody hasn't ordered, how am I personalizing the experience and driving check, right? So how can I do offsell, create upsells and different offers during those times? And so one of the technology companies that I advise for is a startup in AI and drive-through ordering. And so how do I make that ordering experience within that drive-through much more efficient, right? And so if you look at some of the old technology within the drive-throughs, and it's come a long way. In the beginning it was like, and you might have gotten it right, I think 85% of the time, and order accuracy was always a challenge. And so how can you create that better experience to and instill in a human connection to understand the person or the car that's coming through? How do I get that order in an accurate way? So I think you're going to see a lot of push on that, and in terms of staffing is very difficult in that drive-through as well too. So if I can free up labor and have a consistent order taker, have somebody who's upselling every single almost every single order in a very scientific way, and free up that labor to focus on the execution or driving through the back office and getting the food out faster and accurate as we're bagging it, I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the improvements.
I'd also say, how do you Amazon the experience? So I go to In-N-Out Burger with my wife and 2 kids. We get the same thing every time for 5 years, exactly. So why can't it tell me, and I know there's technology out there, it sees my license plate, do you want to order what you got last time? Yes, boom. That saves the $25 an hour person that's standing out there. That's amazing with great service. So how do you Amazon the experience, which is the friction? Because oftentimes we probably all, when you do go to fast food, you may get the same thing if and when you go to fast food. So I think the technology side is huge there, and it seems like there's a lot of opportunity still for adoption from where I see.
I think even and become pickup windows. So I think that Lloyd, what's going to happen when we founded Velvet Taco, and we had a choice: do we do a drive-through or do we do this pickup window? And it just makes sense. I mean, and you're going to be fighting against cities on emission standards and queue line spacing. It's going to make the real estate more expensive. The actual pickup window, it's seamless, it's easy, there's never more than 2 cars in a line, and it's just where it's all going. And I think the cities are all going to get on board with this, and I think just from an execution standpoint, it's way easier. So I just think that's where it's going. You're going to see drive-throughs and cities start fighting it and being against it, and it's going to be more difficult moving forward.
That's a really good point. And I guess with the execution of a pickup window, because we've got a multitude of customers. We've got the customer, we've got the customer of the customer, the delivery operators. I was in Brooklyn just at the weekend before, and I walked past a QSR restaurant, and they had a pickup window. It's obviously in an urban environment, and standing around it at 10 p.m. was 20 dudes in helmets, all clamoring for an order, and there's stressed worker there. So I guess, how do we manage the look of that as well, when we've got all these different this volume of off-premise as well?
Yeah, I know in the drive-through experience, we're not in that area of a dense urban area, but I think as the drive-through, it's absolutely a no-brainer. But how will we get organized in that environment? I'm sure there's a way, and it just seems like it's easier, it's fastalized, it's a digitalized experience, and as third-party vendors are continuing to grow, how do you make that seamless that it doesn't slow down the whole experience?
And we have a session later today with Chick-fil-A and their latest concept and how they're sort of streamlining that better. And I'm just cognizant of, you want to say
No, I
something?
was just going to add to, because I think it's really, a great point, especially in New York. During COVID, we had shifted to no in-room dining, so it was all focused on takeout and delivery. And then when we started to reopen restaurants, same thing in fine dining. You're walking into Gramercy Tavern, but you have delivery drivers standing in front and creating that experience. And so I think some of the off-prem is also, it's one size fits one, and that's kind of our motto, is that it may not be for every restaurant because the restaurant wasn't designed, and that experience, we don't want the first interaction and that welcome into the front door crowded by 50 bikes and people kind of trying to navigate through it. And so I think as you start to look at design becomes very important, but also, again, that restaurant type of where it makes sense.
Yeah.
I like the pickup window too. I think I agree. There's also an interesting trend, I think, for upscale and like very hip markets where you'll see maybe an $80 or $100 check average, steakhouse that also has a to-go window that does burgers that can do 40 Rand a week with a cashier and one grill cook while they're prepping the Caesar salad for dinner and whatnot. So how do you again monetize that like lunchtime that no one thought about going to that restaurant? The team's already there prepping for dinner, and that's a lot of revenue with nobody worrying about the dine-in. They got to go sit on the corner and eat it, but it's because it's coming from this upscale restaurant. The perception is that it's like this really curated special thing. So whether it's to-go windows or, again, getting creative with the day part, but not even letting guests in the building at lunch. And there's a great example of that in Venice, and they're doing really well.
I like those kind of creative solutions to these issues. It's not like how we always done something and then just cram it into this new way that people want to interact with. With that as well, I also want to touch, I think tech can also claim a lot of the attention when it comes to, well, how do we make it frictionless and how do we improve the experience? But then, you can nail that, but I see a lot of fast casual concepts where it's a good problem to have. They've got a lot of people waiting around for their order. Like they ordered ahead and then they're just kind of standing around. So what other aspects probably don't get as much attention that we should be focusing on that might be pretty easy wins in terms of improving operationally, considering we have this sort of uptick in digital ordering as well happening? What are the things that we're not thinking about?
I think primarily, so tech really is also could be used for measurement and evaluation. And so all of a sudden, if you have 50 restaurants and you've got a KDS that could tell you how long ticket times were in Oklahoma versus Ohio, I think those kind of things are really underutilized, as well as technology in the kitchen. Just knowing that, how old your fryer oil is, what your rotation on product. I mean, there's a whole bunch of tech that could make operations so much better in fast casual for sure. That's kind of coming, but it's only in the second inning, where eventually I think it's going to make a bigger impact as we go.
Yeah, a lot of exciting.
I think fast casual sometimes is forgetting that you've got 50 tickets in the window for pickup and delivery, and the guests, there's 2 people in line, and it takes them like 28 minutes to get their order when the intent was it to be 3 minutes. So forgetting about the guests that have parked their car and come in, and trading that guest that's upset for 4 guests that are ordering online. So really making sure that you're satisfying everyone rather than upsetting 2 and earning 4. It's you really have to think about what's the experience in the restaurant if you're still going to let guests inside. I think there's some opportunity, not speaking specifically about Fat, but just in general across all fast casual for sure.
Yeah, I think back of the house automation and back of the house production has come. It's always been critical, right? But when you start to look at in the omni-channel world and you have orders and inputs coming in from multiple channels, without having robust data and analytics and forecasting, and I think forecasting is a start for everything to really drive the restaurant, the performance of the restaurant. So, not having, traditionally a lot of times we're building schedules on kind of manage your gut feel, right? Tuesdays are always like this, and I'm looking at last week, but there's so many other inputs that come into scientifically bringing in the data to really understand, driving accurate forecasts that can then drive better staffing, can drive better production, order management and queuing, right? Knowing and predicting when all your orders are coming in, so your kitchens are well equipped with the right product at the right time. And so I think going through this evolution of, we have access to all this information. We all look at the same measurements. We all look at the same data, but it's transitioning from actual reporting to really data and insights and starting to look at that data journey. And we talk a lot within our own company about demystifying data, right? Not making it this like just a whole bunch of stuff that keeps managers in the back office, not on the floor with the guests, but how do you really have the people looking at the data, comp sale, looking at your daily sales reports and all those things are really important, but what's the story behind the data? What's it really telling us so that you can actually get to the heart of what do I need to do and what change do I need to implement to really drive either put more butts in seats or start to look at where I might be going sideways on waste or some of my COGS or prime costs. And so that evolution, I think, is really starting to come into restaurants and understanding, we've all have access to a lot of data, but how do I really apply that data to start making and infusing decision-making within the organization? I think is going to be a key differentiator of success.
Yeah, and I know that's tricky to work out, and like partnering with the right vendors to be able to make that happen, Kelly, is difficult. And I mean, how far away do you think we are from having that kind of, really tangible, usable data analytics?
I think it's, when I came, back to Union Square Hospitality Group and started to look at it and working with some of the tech startups, there's just different capability. Larger restaurants and larger chains, which many people in the room represent, have teams to do those things. And what I started to find was really when you start to look at really the independent, the small business, the mid-market, I think is where some of those struggles are. And the great thing that I think that came out of, nothing was great about COVID, but if we look at silver linings, is this kind of emergence of tech and collaboration within the restaurant industry. And it really forced an acceleration of adoption of technology. And so I think there are some great startups that allow you to be able to do that. And you can start to kind of put together, we talk about this tech stack, this mythical tech stack, it's complicated and but it's also not rocket science. And I think it's really about having collaborative vendors that have started to piece these pieces together and build those capabilities, especially for small independent and mid-sized markets. So the tech is there, the data is there to be able to do it, but then it's also rethinking your organization of bringing in people who understand data. And one of my recent hires, which you just wouldn't think in the company our size, is I brought in a data scientist, right, and partnered them with our operations teams to really get into, again, telling the story behind the data. It's not just that you're running a high, your labor's running high. It's why, what periods of the day, where do you start to have, how do I start to fill reservations and shoulder periods? And then connecting that to marketing to say, how are you going to drive those butts in those seats during those off times? And start to use that data to really help drive the discussions with your GMs and your operators to make better decisions.
Right, and in terms of building out that tech stack and what it looks like today, we have a great panel happening later today, which is building out the technology roadmap and what that even means. So that'll be a great one to check out. But look, I just want to jump to something else now, just to round out this talk about tech. One of the, I guess, great headline makers in the restaurant tech world is robots, and I'm going to play just. I just want to show you this image here. So this is something that I saw a QSR mag the other day. This is some technology that a fast casual's trying out at the moment. But in the bench itself is a bunch of robotics to be able to spit out. The idea is digital orders, off-premise orders, and then we've got the bench on top, which is the make line for humans to use to create orders in-house. Again, that voice that tells me, but hospitality and humanity, what are your thoughts when you see this? I'll open that to anyone.
I think anything robotic, I get exciting. Especially if it's a commodity. I mean, you look at Starbucks, I think some of their volumes are like twice what they were intended to do out of the same footprint with all these different channels. Depending on how progressive your coffee making skills are at home, you may be doing the same thing a barista's doing. If you spend like $5,000 on an automatic Jura, you press a button, it just does it. Why shouldn't everything be kind of thinking that? So the nuances of the sauces and the prep is done by a human. But in terms of execution, if you can make it robotic, I think that's huge. 100%.
Yeah. How about you, Jack?
I mean, I have mixed feelings on it. There's a certain thing about craftsmanship and a barista making my coffee that I just sort of like, and so, but I do find that everyone's trying to skip ahead on it. Where, you know, I just think on automation today, when I look at that piece of equipment, I'd really like to know how it works better, because what I'm finding is my kitchen equipment needs to evolve faster. Just getting it to work accurately, and then the actual automation could be is how many you know, fat particles are actually in my oil today, and when do I actually need to change it? My griddle, it's got too much oil on it, so my product's not searing right. I think those are like the real problems that need to be solved, and I think a lot of this stuff like looks sexy and looks cool, and then a robot shows up next to my table, and it's just like, I don't get it, you know, because I just don't think it's as cool as maybe other people do. I think that craftsmanship, talent, you know, like, look, I do think labor is an issue, and you do want to make inroads on that. But at the end of the day, any business that can't train people to be talented and do things that make it unique and special, it does turn into a commodity, and then it loses any specialness that it ever had.
I'm glad I threw this curveball in here. I like it. This is good friction. Now, I do want to jump to the employee experience, because that's such a huge, you know, issue that the industry is dealing with. High turnover rates, and there's this huge shortages. So, you know, I mean, how do you guys see the industry overall responding to all of these challenges, and what do you think, what more could be done right now?
I think it's about culture. So if you really want to grow a brand, culture is like the #1 thing. If you don't have a culture, then it's a soulless brand, and you're just basically doing tasks. I think that doubling down on culture and training and those type of things is what organizations should be doing, because you know, that there are people, and if we think about cutting out the people, then who's going to end up, you know, developing, being able to grow and scale? And it's so hard for people to get talented people now if you're not thinking about how to make their jobs better, how to train them to learn more, give them something to look forward to in the future. You know, creating a culture that really appreciates what they do and compliments them, and then I think you're going to struggle scaling any brand.
I love this subject. To me, like, looking at my prior life before FAT, when we were scaling Eureka, culture, I think it's a little bit overused. We all say it, but what does it mean? And core values and mission statements, all that. So one thing I did in 2016, it was the first down quarter we had ever had. I didn't even know what the word comps meant, because they were always up. And then all of a sudden you have private equity, and they say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I took a step back and realized, as we were starting to scale Eureka across the country, I couldn't be there. I couldn't interview every hourly team member. I kind of knew what we were creating, but it wasn't deliberately written out. So to me, going back to the very first question when we started this panel, core set of values. And accountability and teamwork is not a core set of values, because you need that at every company. Or, you know, showing up on time, that's not a core value. So we kind of ripped up everything we were kind of thinking about. We had all these consultants tell us we needed these 10 core values. I'm like, well, that's the same that every company has in America. And we kind of thought about, what does our brand stand for? Why would you want to work at our company, and what kind of guests we wanted to attract? And we literally integrated, I spent a year on it with our HR team, integrating our 3 core values at Eureka, which were energy, discovery, and community, and bleeding that all the way down into the hiring and the firing and the performance management. So no longer was like a kitchen team member late for work. They were letting their community of fellow team members down. No longer was a kitchen team member written up because he didn't know or she didn't know the menu. They had low discovery, which meant they weren't curious, they weren't exploring. So we basically took our core 3 values and bled it through performance management, reviews. There was no longer 5-page reviews that everybody hated going through at the end of the year, and just went back to literally rating our team members on their energy, their discovery in the community, from a 1 to 3. I created a scale across the whole company, 26 restaurants. And you had a rating per restaurant of what the team members' EDC was, and then a store with a low EDC usually correlated with negative store sales, and then obviously we had to go in there and realign. So that took a year of thinking about core values. And then the culture is there. I'm not there Eureka anymore, but if you ask a team member, they know what EDC means, and it becomes almost like a religion. But it can't just be on the wall or in the CEO's desk, and you can't remember what the 10 core values were that you wrote, 3 years earlier. So culture to me is so critical, especially when you're scaling a founder's passion or someone in a very creative space. You guys have so many creative brands. I'd imagine you have your own secret sauce of how you hire and fire.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I don't know if you guys or anybody has done this, but we've really started this gamification of training, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, now, and it's really how do you use tech effectively to reinforce a lot of those things, Justin, like core values, because our team in a particular brand communicates every day to all the staff because everybody's looking at their phones. So as you use gamification, you use it for the obvious things like training them, on knowledge of product and all those type of things. But it's also about the brand, about the mission, about, things that are new. So all of a sudden, communication, the old school of like you tell the GM, expect him to get everybody to get to know it. It's impossible. But now, because everybody's got a phone, all the staff members, back of the house and front of the house, everybody could get the same message or unique messages to certain groups or, and it's a way to really build on things and really get messages to everybody and really get everybody on board. And then the testing part of it kind of creates this like inherently competition that, man, I do want to know more about wine. And now I can use this to really explore something I'm super curious about or, so I find that this idea of gamification and training is a fascinating way to really improve overall communication, strengthen a brand, reinforce culture, reinforce a lot of the mission and things like that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Kelly, from your perspective, I know you've done a lot of work here to streamline the experience for employees.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Culture, and I have the great fortune of working, at USHG, where we actually have a book that we follow, and it's and so everything you read in Setting the Table, is our culture and our values, and it's really about the employees first, and also agree, with Jack about just mobile first communications, instant communications out to the employees. But I think it goes back to also our conversation earlier about the restaurant industry as a whole is pressured for gaining and recruiting and attracting talent, and having a great culture. You're going to kind of rise to the top of those decision-making pieces. But how do you compete in this world against the gig economies? How do you create value propositions for your employees that make them want to come to work? Some of that is through automation and technology of automating mundane tasks or repeat tasks and using technology to really let them drive on value and added tasks and growth and development. And so I think that's one area. There's other things like, again, going back to giving them the value of, tipping has emerged in kind of every category, right? It's not just about dining in a restaurant. You're seeing tipping coming more common in QSR, fast casual, and so how do I give our employees access to same-day pay? And so through tip distribution and using technology to enable those types of things. And I think those are the things that are going to start to look and create differentiation and attracting talent within brands of a strong culture, strong learning and development and growth patterns, but also how do I get my money faster, right? And so how can I have this, experience so I can start to compete with, giving people choice in the gig economy as well too. And so I think a lot of, focus on that is going to come through of the differentiators of who's getting the top and keeping the top talent.
Excellent. Now, look, we got 8 minutes left. I do want to open it up to, we have any questions in the audience? Yeah, throw up your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Don't start talking yet. We'll get it on record.
So, Jack, I wanted to ask, when you were talking about the pickup window experience, you were talking about drive-thrus, and are you talking about the pickup window for cars or pickup window just for walk-up?
It could be either, but primarily I was talking about for cars, because when you think about the traditional drive-through, cities are fighting it. It's a big expense because of the length of queues that now cities are asking for. The drive-through pickup window idea of just a car that's already pre-ordered, prepaid, it's like Uber. You just drive up, they hand you the bag and you go, and you've got everything you need. And I just think that it's such a I mean, to me, it's just such a no-brainer of where, you know, you don't have to fight against the city. The emissions are going to end up being a huge issue. If you have a patio, you got all this car smoke going onto your patio. I mean, it's inherently a problem. And some people deal with it really well, like certainly Chick-fil-A and other brands. But I just think in general, the idea of going to a drive-through pickup window where everything's prepaid, it's very quick, it's very easy, it's just seems like a natural thing to do.
So inside the spaces, you have pickups for your Uber drivers and you know, DoorDash, Grubhub, and any of the other 7 platforms that are coming into the space, and they're interacting with the guests either in fast casual and full dine. In fast casuals, they're congregating around a pickup area, usually at the front counter, and that creates friction. And then you have full dine, where the operators are moving the stuff away from either a bar or a table or someplace, and again, causing friction because you have people coming in and standing and waiting. How do you see all of those in both those environments? How do you see those changing? You know, at the last Spaces show, we had a lot of the folks were talking about creating separated areas for pickup. And I'm wondering to see if that is still in the direction you're thinking that's going, and how you're separating it. That would be a huge, because we run both environments, fast casual and full dine, and they're different.
I think you have to just be highly conscious of that integration, especially if the Uber driver's there and waiting for 10 minutes or whatnot. So really creating a special place for them to wait that is not going to impact the guest experience coming in. They're also future guests, or they're going to interact with future guests. So can you create an incentive for them? We go to the airport, you got to go to the 4th floor on the parking structure on the backside to get your Uber in some cities. So how do you say, hey, you know, delivery, please stay outside on these outdoor areas, but can I get you a soda while you wait? Like create the incentive for them to want to, I guess, break away if that's what your desire is. At least that's how I think about it. But again, real estate's expensive. So creating a giant to-go area, unless it's really going to generate enough revenue, hard to do that. But I think it has to be very deliberate from where I sit in terms of where do you actually want them to be, and how can it be a good experience for them as well? Because again, they're future guests.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's economics driven, but I think that's when you start to get into those high volume or high, you know, depending on the numbers. I mean, in certain markets, I think that's where a dark kitchen can come into play. And so if you have a very strong off-prem delivery, then starting to look at, you know, a dark kitchen to be able to service those customers out of there and separating it from the physical space. But I think it depends. I know it's not a great answer. I know in our fast casual, fine casual brands within the city, we're still, when we're looking at development and we're doing the designs for one of our newer locations, it depends on the space as well, but definitely putting a separate pickup area around the corner away and servicing it with a barista station that can just service those pickup orders, you know, separately from kind of the front of the restaurant, where we're trying to create more community space.
I think we do it a little differently. Like we require a third party to use the drive-through pickup windows. So if we don't want them in the building. We want them to quickly get the food and get it delivered as quickly as possible. The other thing we're really studying, and we're thinking about them on the inside of fast casuals and on the exterior of fast casuals, and I'm sure you guys have seen these, is these boxes. Because right now, some places I go, the food just sits out. I don't know about you guys, but I just feel like food security is going to become an issue eventually. And in these boxes, it's kind of a cool experience that you just take your phone, you QR code it, and it's your food, and that box pops open, and you just take your food. It alerts, you know, that same technology alerts the person who's working in the kitchen that knows that you've taken your food, and it's just a really cool system. And we're looking at designing those either inside the restaurants or fast casual, or even on the exterior, that if you drive through, it might just be, if you're in a hurry, you could just hit this QR code and it just pops open, you take your food and you just go. But I think there is an organization, you don't want it to all bottle up at the, you know, at the counter, because then it doesn't create a good experience for everybody.
We nearly out of time. We got 2 minutes. We probably got time for one more question. Well, look, I just want to finish up, and we come back to this idea of, what makes, to win is like, you want to stand out, right? You want people to recognize who you are, and I mean, the thing that I fear is this sea of sameness. We have budgetary restraints, we have to sort of standardize, and or we kind of want to emulate what another brand is doing that might seem cool and has stick. But I mean, how do we make sure that we're not sort of just blending into a bunch of boxes where if I was to rip off the logo inside and outside, I wouldn't know whose box that really belonged to?
I mean, I think the restaurant of the futures are going to revolve around nuance. So if it's not differentiated, if it's not special, if it doesn't have its own secret sauce, then I think that doesn't really have a purpose. So, and unless you really that concept has its why, it has its mission, and it's really marching in direction on all points. That's what. And I think in its own kind of like unspoken way, the consumer gets it. Like they're smart, and they figure it out, and they may not be able to say every part of the uniqueness of the journey, but in general they connect with it, and it becomes their place.
Any other thoughts there?
Back to just market dominance and distinction, and I love the Simon Sinek reference to why there. I love that. Why does the brand exist? And then how does everything that you do, from the performance management to the beer you sell to how the restrooms look, or to the flooring to the lighting, how does it all reinforce this why? And extremely deliberate decision making around that, I think, is key. So everybody doesn't have Brussels sprouts and kale salad and whatnot.
Great. I think, look, we're right out of time. So Jack, Kelly, and Justin, thank you so much for offering your time. What a great way to kick it off. Thank you.